the final days of World War II, kamikaze pilot Koichi Shikishima was supposed to die for his country. Instead, he faked engine trouble and landed on a remote island, where a terrifying monster emerged from the sea and slaughtered his fellow soldiers. Paralyzed by fear, Koichi couldn't pull the trigger when he had the chance to stop it. Now, years later, that same creature has returned to destroy everything he's built, and this time, there's nowhere left to run. The year was 1945, and the Second World War was drawing to its bloody conclusion. Koichi Shikishima, a young kamikaze pilot, had been assigned a mission that would have meant certain death: to crash his aircraft into an American naval vessel and sacrifice his life for his country. But when the moment came to fulfill his duty, courage abandoned him. Instead of following through with his suicide mission, Koichi made a fateful decision that would haunt him for years to come. He altered his flight path and headed toward Oto Island, claiming his plane required urgent repairs. Upon landing on the remote island, Koichi approached the senior mechanic station there, Sasaku Tachibana, and instructed him to examine his aircraft for mechanical problems. After conducting a thorough inspection of the plane from top to bottom, Tachibana delivered news that Koichi didn't want to hear. "We've scoured your rig completely and cannot find anything wrong with it." The implication was clear: Koichi's claim of mechanical failure was a lie, and Tachibana knew it. When confronted with this reality, Koichi responded with sharp anger and stormed away, unable to face the truth about his cowardice. That night, everything changed. An emergency alarm shattered the peaceful evening, sending panic through the small military outpost. The source of the alarm soon became terrifyingly apparent as an enormous creature emerged from the dark waters surrounding the island. The beast was unlike anything the soldiers had ever seen, a massive, prehistoric monster that would later be known as Godzilla. The sight of this impossible creature moving toward them filled every man with primal terror. The soldiers scrambled in panic, their training temporarily forgotten as they struggled to comprehend what they were facing. They hastily took cover in a bunker, pointing their weapons at the approaching monster with trembling hands. Tachibana, trying to maintain some semblance of military discipline, suggested they could use their machine gun to kill the creature. He desperately urged Koichi to take action, knowing that the pilot had access to the aircraft's heavy weaponry. Koichi crept into the cockpit and seized control of the mounted machine gun, positioning himself for what should have been a decisive strike against the monster. This was his moment of redemption, a chance to prove his worth as a soldier and protect his fellow servicemen. But as Godzilla drew closer, Koichi found himself paralyzed by the same fear that had prevented him from completing his kamikaze mission. Despite having a clear shot at the creature, he couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. The consequences of Koichi's inaction were swift and devastating. The other soldiers, seeing that their most powerful weapon remained silent, began firing at Godzilla with their smaller firearms. These inadequate weapons only served to anger the beast rather than harm it. Enraged by the attack, Godzilla moved forward with terrifying purpose, crushing the soldiers like insects beneath its massive feet. The massacre that followed was brutal and complete. Seeing the monster approaching his position, Koichi finally abandoned the cockpit and fled from his aircraft. In its fury, Godzilla grabbed the plane in its massive jaws and hurled it to the ground, where it exploded in a ball of fire. The blast wave knocked Koichi unconscious, sparing him from witnessing the final moments of his comrade's slaughter. When morning came, Koichi awakened to a scene of absolute horror. The bodies of his fellow soldiers were scattered across the island, torn apart by Godzilla's rampage. The only other survivor was Tachibana, who had somehow managed to escape the creature's wrath and was now grimly collecting the corpses of their dead comrades. Upon seeing Koichi, the mechanic's grief immediately transformed into rage. He blamed Koichi entirely for the tragedy, correctly identifying his cowardice as the root cause of their friends' deaths. Overcome with guilt and shame, Koichi could only weep for his lost comrades. He knew that Tachibana's accusations were justified. If he had acted when he had the chance, if he had fired the machine gun when Godzilla was vulnerable, the other men might still be alive. The weight of this knowledge would burden him for years to come. Eventually, Koichi and Tachibana were evacuated from Oto Island and returned to Tokyo. What Koichi found upon his homecoming was almost as devastating as what he had left behind on the island. The once great city had been reduced to rubble by Allied bombing campaigns. Everything he had known was gone: his neighborhood, his family home, and most importantly, his family. Walking through the ruins of his former life, Koichi encountered his neighbor, Sumiko Oda, who was crying as she shared the news that her son had been killed in one of the bombing raids. When Koichi asked about his own parents, Sumiko delivered the crushing news that they too had perished in the attacks. Everyone he had once known and loved was dead, leaving him completely alone in a destroyed world. As Koichi continued through the devastated streets, he witnessed another scene that would change the course of his life. Police officers were chasing a young woman named Noriko Oishi, who was carrying a baby in her arms. In desperation, Noriko ran directly into Koichi, thrust the infant into his arms, and then continued running from her pursuers. Confused and concerned, Koichi followed her until he found her again on a nearby street, where he returned the baby to her care. But Noriko didn't simply take the child and leave. Instead, she followed Koichi and begged him not to abandon them. Her desperation touched something in Koichi's heart, and that night, he brought both Noriko and the baby to what remained of his family home. There, Noriko revealed her tragic story. She was completely alone in the world, having lost everything and everyone she had ever known. The baby, she explained, wasn't even hers. The child's mother had entrusted the infant to Noriko's care before dying, making her promise to look after the little girl no matter what happened. Moved by Noriko's story and perhaps seeking some form of redemption for his past failures, Koichi asked for the baby's name. Noriko told him the child was called Akiko. From that moment forward, the three of them began living together as an unlikely family, bound not by blood but by shared loss and mutual need for human connection in a world that had taken everything from them. For an entire year, they lived this way, with Koichi working odd jobs to support their small household while Noriko cared for Akiko. Despite the hardships, there were moments of genuine happiness and peace, but their precarious stability was threatened when Koichi received a letter from the government offering him employment in a dangerous but well-paying job. The work involved locating and disarming underwater mines that had been planted on the ocean floor by both American and Japanese forces during the war. When Koichi explained the opportunity to Noriko, she immediately expressed her concerns about the danger involved. Koichi acknowledged the risks but emphasized that the pay would be substantial enough to improve their living conditions significantly and provide better opportunities for Akiko's future. He assured Noriko that the government would provide advanced weapons and boats for the mission, making it sound safer than it actually was. What Koichi discovered on his first day of work was that the government had deceived them about the quality of equipment they would receive. Instead of modern, reliable gear, they were provided with old, outdated weapons and boats that had seen better days. At the job site, Koichi met his new colleagues who would form the minesweeper crew. The team was led by Kenji Noda, a former naval engineer who served as the mission commander and briefed the crew on their procedures. Also on the team were Seiji Akitsu and Mizushima, experienced sailors who helped train newcomers like Koichi in the dangerous art of mine disposal. The work was methodical and perilous. The crew would locate underwater mines using sonar equipment, then attempt to detonate them safely from a distance. During one of these operations, Akitsu struggled to hit his targets, missing several shots in a row. Observing his difficulty, Koichi asked if he could try his hand at the task. When given the opportunity, Koichi's wartime training proved invaluable. He easily destroyed the mine with a single, precise shot. Noda was impressed by this display of skill and began to see Koichi as a valuable asset to the team. As time passed, the minesweeper crew successfully disposed of many underwater explosives, and their teamwork grew stronger with each mission. Meanwhile, Koichi's personal life also flourished. He, Noriko, and Akiko had managed to build a house together, creating a real home where they could live as a family. The house became a gathering place for Koichi's work crew, who would often visit for dinner. During one such gathering, Noriko prepared food for everyone, and the crew members praised her cooking while playfully referring to her as Koichi's sister-in-law. This innocent comment prompted Noriko to clarify that she and Koichi weren't actually married. Koichi then explained their unusual living arrangement to his colleagues, how Noriko had come to live with him after losing everything in the Tokyo bombing, and how Akiko wasn't their biological daughter but a child they had taken in together. Their domestic happiness faced a new challenge when Noriko announced that she had secured a desk job in the Ginza district and would soon be able to support herself financially. While this represented a positive step toward independence for Noriko, Koichi worried about the practical implications, particularly regarding Akiko's care while Noriko was at work. Noriko had already thought of this concern and arranged for Sumiko Oda, their neighbor, to look after Akiko during work hours. Though reluctant to change their current arrangement, Koichi ultimately agreed that this plan would work. However, their peaceful existence was about to be shattered by the return of an old nightmare. While conducting their regular mine-clearing operations in the ocean, the minesweeper crew came across a destroyed ship that showed signs of having been attacked by something massive and powerful. The extensive damage to the vessel shocked the crew, who couldn't imagine what kind of creature could cause such destruction. Koichi, however, recognized the signs immediately. Drawing upon his traumatic experience on Odo Island, he explained to his confused teammates that this was the work of Godzilla. As evidence, he pointed to the dead fish floating in the water around their boat, a phenomenon he had witnessed before on Odo Island. He explained that Godzilla killed sea life in its path, leaving a trail of floating carcasses that served as a warning of the monster's approach. As if summoned by Koichi's words, more dead fish began appearing around their vessel, confirming his worst fears. Realizing that Godzilla was approaching their location, Koichi urgently ordered everyone to flee immediately, but it was too late for a clean escape. Suddenly, Godzilla emerged from the depths behind their ship, its massive form rising from the water like a prehistoric mountain. The crew desperately accelerated their boat while Koichi and Noda quickly threw a large explosive device into the water, hoping to damage or deter the creature. The bomb struck Godzilla directly but failed to penetrate its seemingly impenetrable hide. Undaunted by their attack, Godzilla lunged forward with its mouth open menacingly. The crew threw another bomb, but this time the detonator wire became disconnected before it could explode, leaving them defenseless. In desperation, Koichi climbed onto the deck and opened fire on Godzilla with a machine gun, aiming for the creature's mouth. The sustained gunfire caused an explosion that damaged part of Godzilla's jaw, but the monster's incredible regenerative abilities allowed it to heal almost immediately. Just as Godzilla prepared to destroy the minesweeper boat, salvation arrived in the form of a Japanese army ship that approached from another direction and launched a coordinated attack on the monster. This new threat drew Godzilla's attention away from the smaller vessel, giving the minesweeper crew a chance to escape. The army ship engaged Godzilla in fierce combat, with cannon fire and naval artillery striking the creature repeatedly. Though wounded by the sustained attack, Godzilla proved far from defeated. The monster dove beneath the army ship and began turning the entire vessel upside down with its immense strength. Despite being capsized and severely damaged, the army ship's crew continued fighting, firing every weapon they had at the monster. Their determination and bravery finally seemed to pay off when their attacks wounded Godzilla enough to force it to retreat beneath the surface. For a moment, it appeared that human military might have triumphed over the prehistoric terror. This victory was short-lived. From the depths of the ocean, Godzilla unleashed a devastating atomic heat ray attack that split the army ship in half and destroyed it completely. After this display of overwhelming power, the monster roared loudly in triumph before disappearing back into the dark waters. Koichi was severely injured during this encounter and lost consciousness during the battle. When he next awakened, he found himself in his own home, where Noriko tended to his wounds with visible concern and worry. The physical injuries, however, were nothing compared to the psychological trauma that Koichi was experiencing. Overwhelmed by guilt and self-recrimination, Koichi blamed himself for everything that had happened. He confessed to Noriko that his mistake in 1945 on Oto Island had resulted in the deaths of his entire team. He revealed how he had frozen in fear when given the opportunity to kill Godzilla with a machine gun, and how his cowardice had led directly to the massacre of his fellow soldiers. The weight of these memories and the knowledge that Godzilla had returned to threaten innocent people drove Koichi to the brink of despair. He told Noriko that he was haunted by these memories and wished he had died alongside his team on that cursed island. The survivor's guilt that had been eating at him for years had only grown stronger with Godzilla's reappearance. Noriko, however, refused to let him sink into complete despair. She comforted him with gentle words, suggesting that fate had kept him alive for a reason. She insisted that if he was still alive despite all the dangers he had faced, his life must have an important purpose that had yet to be fulfilled. Their conversation was interrupted by the wailing of emergency alarms throughout the city. The radio broadcasts brought terrifying news. Godzilla had launched an attack on Ginza, the very district where Noriko worked. Koichi's blood ran cold as he realized that Noriko could be in mortal danger. In the city of Ginza, chaos reigned as Godzilla rampaged through the streets, destroying everything in its path with methodical precision. Buildings crumbled under its massive feet, and people fled in terror as the monster advanced through the urban landscape like an unstoppable force of nature. Noriko found herself trapped on a train when Godzilla's attention turned toward the railway. In a display of casual brutality, the monster picked up the entire train in its jaws and began crushing one of the carriages while Noriko watched in horror from inside. Showing remarkable presence of mind and courage, she managed to jump into a nearby river to save herself, barely escaping the creature's deadly grip. Meanwhile, Koichi had left the safety of his home and ventured into the city to search for Noriko. Against all odds, he managed to locate her in the chaos and confusion of the evacuation. Together, they joined the crowds of people fleeing from Godzilla's rampage, running desperately through streets filled with debris and terror. The Japanese military attempted to stop Godzilla using tank units, but their conventional weapons proved inadequate against the monster's incredible resilience. Worse, their attacks only seemed to anger Godzilla further. In response to the military assault, an ominous blue light began emanating from Godzilla's back, signaling the creature's preparation to use its most devastating weapon. Recognizing the signs of Godzilla's atomic breath attack from his experience on Oto Island, Koichi understood the magnitude of destruction that was about to be unleashed. The monster's atomic heat ray would trigger massive explosions capable of leveling entire city blocks and killing thousands of people instantaneously. In the final moments before the attack, Noriko made the ultimate sacrifice. Seeing the destructive blast approaching and realizing that Koichi was in its path, she pushed him to safety behind cover, shielding him with her own body. The atomic explosion that followed was devastating, destroying buildings and claiming countless lives in its wake. When the dust settled and Koichi emerged from the rubble, he found himself in a landscape of complete devastation. The area was lifeless and silent, with no signs of survivors anywhere. Most heartbreakingly, there was no trace of Noriko. She had vanished in the atomic blast, presumably vaporized along with thousands of other innocent victims. Overcome with grief at the loss of the woman who had become the most important person in his life, Koichi broke down completely, but his despair quickly transformed into something else as he heard Godzilla's approaching roar in the distance. His sadness became white-hot anger and an overwhelming desire for revenge against the monster that had taken everything from him. Standing amid the ruins of Ginza, Koichi screamed his defiance at the creature, vowing that this time would be different. Returning home to mourn Noriko's death, Koichi was approached by Noda, who brought news from the government. Their Minesweeper crew, along with other military personnel, had been selected for a special mission to stop Godzilla once and for all. Noda explained that he had been working on a plan to defeat the monster and invited Koichi to join the effort.
参加しますか?
The meeting location was revealed to be a gathering of various military personnel and former naval officers who were united in their determination to end Godzilla's reign of terror. At this assembly, Koichi met Tatsuo Hata, the captain of the warship Yukikaze, who served as one of the operation's military commanders. Noda revealed his ingenious strategy for defeating Godzilla. Since conventional weapons had proven ineffective against the monster's incredible durability and regenerative abilities, they would need to use the environment itself as a weapon. The plan involved luring Godzilla to the Sagami Trench, a deep underwater canyon, and then using the ocean's pressure to destroy it. The strategy was elegantly simple in concept but complex in execution. First, they would surround Godzilla with ships carrying Freon gas tanks. These tanks would be ruptured simultaneously, creating a massive bubble of gas around the creature that would drastically reduce the water's buoyancy. This would cause Godzilla to sink rapidly to a depth of 1,500 meters, where the crushing water pressure would theoretically be sufficient to kill even this incredibly resilient creature. If the pressure strategy failed, they had prepared Plan B balloons would be inflated beneath Godzilla to force it rapidly back to the surface. The sudden decompression from such a dramatic depth change would cause explosive decompression that should destroy the monster from within. Captain Hata and the other military leaders agreed that Godzilla's destructive capabilities made it an existential threat to Japan. The creature had already demonstrated its ability to level entire city districts and kill thousands of people in single attacks. They unanimously approved Noda's plan, recognizing it as their best hope for protecting millions of lives. However, the plan required one crucial element: a way to lure Godzilla to the exact location where the trap would be set. Noda explained that they needed a pilot willing to fly directly over the monster, provoking it with weapons fire and then leading it to the Sagami Trench. This would be an incredibly dangerous mission, as the pilot would need to fly close enough to anger Godzilla while staying far enough away to avoid its atomic breath attacks. Koichi immediately volunteered for this suicidal mission. He told Noda that he would need the help of an excellent mechanic to prepare a suitable aircraft for the task. Despite their bitter history, Koichi knew that Tachibana was the only person with the skills necessary to make such modifications to a fighter plane. Finding Tachibana at his workshop, Koichi approached the mechanic, who still harbored deep resentment about the events on Oto Island. Tachibana continued to blame Koichi for the deaths of their comrades in 1945, making his anger and disgust clear. But when Koichi explained the current situation and the plan to stop Godzilla, something changed in the old mechanic's attitude. Koichi admitted his guilt and responsibility for what had happened on Oto Island, but he argued that this mission represented a chance for redemption. He told Tachibana that they now had an opportunity to save millions of innocent lives by stopping Godzilla once and for all. The government and military needed their help to prepare a plane capable of completing this vital mission. Despite his lingering anger, Tachibana recognized the importance of what Koichi was asking. The mechanic agreed to help, and together they went to the location where the aircraft would be prepared. Working with determination born of necessity, Tachibana began the complex process of modifying a fighter plane for the dangerous mission ahead. While Tachibana worked on the aircraft, Noda coordinated the preparation of weapons and gas cylinders that would be needed for the trap. The entire operation required precise timing and coordination between multiple ships and crews. Every detail had to be perfect, as they would likely only get one chance to execute their plan. Within a few days, all preparations were complete. The modified aircraft was ready, the ships were loaded with their specialized equipment, and the naval forces began moving toward their destination in the Sagami Trench. Koichi boarded his plane and took off, knowing that he was embarking on what would likely be his final mission. To attract Godzilla's attention, the naval forces used underwater sound-emitting devices that transmitted sonic waves through the ocean. These sounds, designed to mimic territorial challenges from rival creatures, successfully irritated Godzilla and drew it toward the surface. As planned, the monster emerged from the depths and began heading toward the nearest city, following its instinct to destroy human settlements. Koichi intercepted Godzilla in his aircraft, flying dangerously close to the creature to provoke it further. He strafed the monster with machine gun fire, careful to inflict just enough damage to anger it without causing enough harm to make it retreat. The strategy worked perfectly. Godzilla became furious and began pursuing the aircraft, following Koichi as he led it out to sea toward the waiting naval forces. Seeing the pilot and monster approaching their position, Noda excitedly ordered all ships to prepare for battle. The naval vessels closed in on Godzilla from multiple directions, surrounding the creature while it remained focused on pursuing Koichi's plane. The crews began throwing the specialized gas cylinders into the water around Godzilla's massive form. Once the cylinders were in position, the crews activated them simultaneously. The Freon gas created massive bubbles that dramatically reduced the water's density around Godzilla. As intended, the creature began sinking rapidly toward the ocean floor, pulled down by the sudden loss of buoyancy. The plan was working exactly as Noda had predicted. Godzilla was dragged down to a depth of 1,500 meters, where the crushing water pressure should have been sufficient to kill it. However, monitoring equipment indicated that the creature was still alive despite the immense pressure. The monitoring crews could feel the cables being pulled and strained, suggesting that Godzilla was not only surviving but actively fighting against its underwater imprisonment. With Plan A proving insufficient, the naval forces immediately implemented Plan B. Noda activated the emergency balloons designed to rapidly bring Godzilla back to the surface. The sudden ascent from 1,500 meters caused severe decompression damage to the creature, but it still managed to break free from the cables and balloons before reaching the surface. Breaking free from its restraints, Godzilla prepared to unleash its atomic breath attack against the surrounding ships. The crews realized that if the monster succeeded in using its heat ray, every vessel in the area would be destroyed instantly, killing everyone involved in the operation. At this critical moment, Koichi made his final choice. Missing his fallen comrades from Oto Island and driven by grief over Noriko's death, he sought the ultimate revenge against the monster that had caused so much suffering. Flying his aircraft directly toward Godzilla, Koichi aimed for the creature's open mouth, the same target he had failed to hit years earlier when his cowardice had doomed his team. This time, there was no hesitation. Koichi flew his plane straight into Godzilla's mouth and triggered the explosive device that Tachibana had installed in the aircraft. The resulting explosion was tremendous, completely destroying Godzilla's head and finally ending the monster's reign of terror. Noda and the other naval personnel initially mourned Koichi's apparent sacrifice, believing that he had given his life to save Japan. However, their grief turned to joy when they spotted a parachute descending nearby. Koichi had survived the explosion by using an ejector seat that Tachibana had secretly installed in the aircraft. Floating down on his parachute, Koichi witnessed the aftermath of his successful attack. Godzilla's headless body emitted an eerie blue light before beginning to disintegrate into fragments that fell into the ocean. The monster that had terrorized Japan was finally dead. When Koichi returned to base, he was greeted as a hero by everyone involved in the operation. The man who had once been consumed by shame and self-doubt had finally found redemption through his willingness to sacrifice everything for others. But his joy was made complete when Sumiko approached him with a telegram she had been holding. The message contained the most wonderful news Koichi could have imagined. Noriko had survived the destruction in Ginza. Rushing to the hospital with Akiko, Koichi was reunited with the woman who had given his life meaning. Noriko had miraculously survived the atomic blast, though her condition suggested she had been severely injured and was still recovering. Their reunion was emotional and overwhelming, with Koichi finally able to express the love he had kept hidden for so long. The family that had been torn apart by Godzilla's rampage was whole once again, and Koichi had proven to himself and others that he was capable of courage and self-sacrifice when it truly mattered. However, the film's conclusion carried an ominous warning about the future. Deep beneath the waves of the Sagami Trench, where the fragments of Godzilla's body had fallen, something disturbing was happening. A chunk of the monster's hide that had been shed during the battle began to glow with the same blue light that had preceded the creature's atomic attacks. This fragment was morphing and regenerating, suggesting that Godzilla's incredible healing abilities might allow it to return from what appeared to be complete destruction. The regenerating tissue served as a reminder that some threats can never be fully eliminated, only temporarily defeated. While Japan could celebrate its victory and the heroes could enjoy their hard-earned peace, the possibility of Godzilla's return would always loom over their future. The monster that had risen from the depths once before might do so again, carrying with it the same capacity for destruction and terror that had already claimed so many lives. Koichi's journey from cowardice to heroism was complete, but the price of that transformation had been enormous. The guilt and trauma he had carried since Oto Island had been replaced by the knowledge that he had finally faced his fears and acted with courage when his country needed him most. The man who had once frozen in terror at the sight of Godzilla had ultimately been the one to destroy it, proving that redemption is possible even for those who believe themselves irredeemable. The story of Godzilla Minus One was ultimately about more than just a giant monster attacking Japan. It was a tale of human resilience, the power of found family, and the possibility of overcoming past failures through present courage. In a world devastated by war and seemingly hopeless circumstances, ordinary people had found the strength to protect what mattered most to them, even when victory seemed impossible.